Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Last Emperor podcast. This is part 2 of the life of Puyi. As I mentioned in the first episode, we're analyzing Puyi as he's shown in the 1987 movie, The Last Emperor, and we are not looking at the actual historical character of Puyi, because he was a real person. The story in the movie does deviate somewhat from the story in real life. We left off in the first episode with the fall of Manchukuo. This was a puppet state which was nominally ruled by Puyi, but behind the scenes, the Japanese were the ultimate power. It became involved in World War II. It was one of the places contested, and the Japanese lost. This whole time, as we're shown in parts of the movie, was a real horrific time for China, really for everybody in that part of the world. The Japanese committed a lot of atrocities in China, and the movie shows that many terrible things happened in Manchukuo while Puyi was the nominal ruler. So he's taken prisoner by the Red Army of the Soviet Union. The Russians invade and they capture Puyi before he's able to escape on a plane. The movie does not go into his subsequent capture and time in Russia. If you're interested in that, you can read up on that online. There's information about what happened there. But all we know in the movie is that he ends up back in China, specifically in Manchuria, in 1950. And he ends up now an actual prisoner. So this is one of the ways that the movie really plays with identity, with words, with contradictions. Because what we see in the first half of the movie, now one quick aside, there's a lot of flashbacks in the movie. I'm looking at it in a linear way, okay? But generally speaking, what we're seeing in the first half of the movie is Puyi is the emperor of China, and then the figurehead emperor of China in the Forbidden City. But in a lot of ways, his palace, the Forbidden City, is in reality a prison. Puyi is not able to really exercise any power over his own life, over China, over the Forbidden City. He's manipulated by the eunuchs. And the walls of the Forbidden City are in a lot of ways prison walls. But still, he's shown deference as the Emperor of China. He still holds some sway just from being born as the Emperor of China. And in a lot of ways, he himself feels this is his rightful destiny, that he should rule. And he hasn't changed yet, even when now he arrives back in China as an actual prisoner. The first scene we see of him there, he arrives off a train and is quickly escorted with other prisoners into a waiting room. And we see him go into a bathroom to try to commit suicide. So this is kind of a curious way to see him now. Why we think is he committing suicide? There's some good reasons you can think of. He's this person who aspired to such greatness throughout all of his life and was told he was so great through all of his life. And now he's a prisoner. So this is not so much of a mystery, but we're going to learn more about it later. One thing that we see, even as a prisoner, is other fellow prisoners still kowtowing to him. We hear them whisper among each other, "It's the emperor," and then they rush to kowtow to him. When he's in the prison yard, I think it's one of his servants gets a look from him. His shoes are untied, and Puyi looks at this man who once served him, and this man rushes over to tie his shoes. So as we're seeing, Puyi either doesn't know how to tie his shoes, which is a mark of his former status, or and even if he does, he still thinks his former servant should rush over and tie them for him. So he's now an actual prisoner. He's been stripped of any and all of his titles, but in his mind, he still hasn't accepted this yet. And what we see is that these prisoners are regarded as war criminals by the now communist Chinese authorities. So a little background on the actual history here is there was, after World War II, there was a civil war in China, and the communist Chinese, led by Mao Zedong, prevailed and took over China in 1949. So Puyi is lumped in with some of his former government, with I believe his brother is there too, as a war criminal. And he's interrogated by one of the officials at the prison. And we can see really a lot of anger in the expressions of this official as he interrogates Puyi. And one thing we notice is that he's referred to now by a number. That's how he's called. He is no longer, of course, called the Lord of 10,000 Years. He's no longer called the Emperor by the officials. He is just another war criminal prisoner referred to as a number, by a number. So that's an important thing to remember about how far he's fallen in his own life. Now, as we're seeing him being interrogated by this official who is lashing out at him as a war criminal, telling him to confess his crimes, we see also in the room is the governor of the prison, and he's not saying too much. He's listening. And we later find out that he's actually interested in Puyi's story. He's actually has a copy of Reginald Fleming Johnston's book, Twilight in the Forbidden City, which details his account as the imperial tutor. Just a reminder, Reginald Fleming Johnston, played by Peter O'Toole in the movie, was a British tutor of Puyi. And in fact, in reality, he did write this book about what he saw there. And I've read it and highly recommend it if you're interested in the story. So we start to notice that this governor, maybe you don't notice, he's just sitting there in the room, he's listening to the interrogation, and he's listening to Puyi's responses and him telling his story. And he starts to take a role in this movie. He starts to take Puyi aside as he's in the prison and ask him questions separately. Not really as an interrogator or as an official, but as a person. We find out that Puyi, one example they give is when he's using the toilet at night, he's waking up the other prisoners, and this is annoying them. So we're seeing another indication of just how he doesn't know how to be an ordinary person, or doesn't think he should be an ordinary person. And the governor, he brings this up with Puyi, and he's bringing up other things with him. And Puyi is feeling very guilty. He's like, as I mentioned, he tried to commit suicide unsuccessfully, and now he's confessing everything. He's confessing that he's responsible for the war crimes by the Japanese, that it all happened because of him. And the governor is kind of annoyed at this, or I think he wants to teach Puyi. He says to him, "You thought you were better than everybody else for your entire life. Now you think you're the worst person in the world." What he's trying to get him to see is that he's not the emperor, and and what we see as the audience is that he'll never really be at peace with himself until he accepts this. And one thing the governor says is, "You are responsible for what you do." And he's saying to him, well, if you didn't know about the crimes, the war crimes committed by the Japanese, and you didn't take a role in it, then you're not responsible, and stop thinking you're responsible. Because in a way, in a negative way, Puyi is still seeing himself as above everybody else. He's still thinking that he has to, that he really played this role that he didn't play. So he has to learn not only that he's not better than everybody else, but that he's not worse than everybody else. He has to keep his ego in check, and as the governor says, be responsible for what he was responsible for. Not take on all this guilt that he has no reason to take on. So this is a really critical scene, and this is really where finally we start to see Puyi's redemption in a way. That whereas previously we've just seen him as a victim of the palace intrigues of the Japanese, we've seen him not only as a victim, but as you could say, a poor politician, as somebody, as a bad husband, as somebody who let himself get taken advantage of. The governor's lessons start to change him. And this is really a critical point in the movie. This part of the movie isn't as flashy. You don't see the costumes, the regalia. So it's not as visually spectacular. It's more gray, it's more black and white, but if you look into it, it's really important. So eventually we get this idea that Pu Yi is accepting the governor's message. He's not the emperor anymore. He's never going to be the emperor anymore. And he can't hold himself responsible for things that he didn't do. Maybe he made mistakes, but those are his mistakes. And what other people did is what they did. What the Japanese did is what they did. It's not what he did. And this is also where we first see him in the prison gardening. And this will play a role later too. Eventually, he's released from the prison, and there's a scene at the end where they also play on this idea of the prison, where the governor remarks to Pu Yi as he's being released, "I will be here longer than you," in that the governor, he stays in the prison. Now Pu Yi is released. And this is somewhat of a metaphor too, because now Pu Yi is finally released from the prison that being an emperor was for him in his whole life. Because really it was a prison for him in his whole life, whether it was Tianjin, whether it was the Forbidden City, whether it was Manchukuo. It was always that way. What we learn later on is Pu Yi is now living as an ordinary person. He's actually working as a gardener. So the former emperor of China, the heir to an empire thousands of years old, one of the greatest countries in the world, the last emperor of China, is now working in China as an ordinary gardener. Now, in reality, it's not quite that simple. It seems the communist authorities did take note of him, and he was, I wouldn't say used, but he was part of their propaganda from time to time. Not a major person as far as I know. But anyway, the movie shows now he's living in China, working as an ordinary gardener. He's an older man now. And he seems at peace. We see him in these brief scenes. He's watering plants. And for the first time, he looks content, really. He's no longer a suicidal prisoner. He's no longer a young man worrying if he'll be poisoned, if he'll be murdered, if he'll ever be an emperor again. We just see him watering plants. So he's now entered that world that he looked on as a child from the open gate of the Forbidden City that was closed to him by his own guards that he was supposed to rule over. We see that, remember that scene when he's a child, he gets the bicycle. Finally, he has some power over the palace staff. He takes the bicycle all the way to the gate of the Forbidden City, and we catch a glimpse of ordinary China and all its chaos and pedestrians, and it's right there outside the Forbidden City, and he sees it, and he wants to go there so much and to see it. And the guards, his own guards, close the door on him, and he's so angry he throws his pet mouse, his friend, at the door. And it's a very chilling scene, really, very sad. So finally he's there. Okay, so what then do we see? There's another really important scene. As I mentioned, China is now ruled by the Communist Party. Mao Zedong is the leader of China. He's the undisputed leader at the time of Puyi's later life. And what we see is that Puyi, he's walking around as an ordinary man. He's an older man now. And there's a parade of the Red Guards, who were young people who took on supporting Chairman Mao, and often through kind of like or I would say it was like a campaign of intimidation, of terror, from what I know. And they're marching next to Puyi, and they are marching with political prisoners, several people. And what we notice is that the Red Guards are all very young, and Puyi, I believe he's walking with his brother, Puche, and he makes a comment how young they all are. And the political prisoners that they're marching are tellingly old. They're older men now. And they have inscriptions on them. They're wearing dunce caps. They're bound. They're being forcefully marched by the Red Guards as a humiliation. And then we see that one of the prisoners is the governor of the prison that Puyi was at. And he's just marching, not saying anything. And we see Puyi sees him in the crowd among the prisoners. And he stops the Red Guards, and he tells them, this is a good man. He's a teacher. And he pleads with them that the governor shouldn't be in this parade. But they don't want to listen to him. They just start saying a lot of slogans, and he's a political prisoner. And then what we see is that the Red Guards tell the governor to kowtow to Chairman Mao. So what we're seeing is that Chairman Mao is like the new emperor. In a way, Puyi wasn't the last emperor. Chairman Mao is now the last emperor. And he's being treated somewhat like a god, like the Lord of 10,000 years. We see his face on a propaganda poster. I think there's like almost like a heavenly way he's painted. And there's almost like a confusion on Puyi's face. But we as the viewer, we're seeing this continuation. Like the old boss, same as the new boss. Puyi was once the person they kowtowed to. Now they're kowtowing to Chairman Mao. Another generation. A new generation Now they're communists, but they're doing the same thing. They're kowtowing. They've fallen for another person who says that they're emperor. And it's a sad scene. And the governor, who was an official under communist China, under Chairman Mao, is now being treated as a prisoner. And he had said to Puyi before he left that I will stay in this prison longer than you. And now he himself is an actual prisoner. So again, this play on the idea of prison, of, the emperor as a power, as a man, as a god. These are all really amazing things to think about. So now we come to the final part of the movie, where it's a little unclear. Bernardo Bertolucci or Mark Peplo, I don't know exactly how to say his name, the screenwriters. It's kind of a mysterious scene, this final scene. All right? He's not giving it all away. I think it's really something you have to interpret for yourself. But I'm going to give you my take on it, and maybe in the comments you all can tell me what you might think. I'd be really interested to know. We can have a discussion. So we see this long shot of Puyi, the old man now. He's returned to the Forbidden City, where once he ruled as the emperor, where once we saw his subjects kowtowing to him as a like barely over like a toddler. He returns as an ordinary man, as a gardener, and we see him walking up the steps, and he's going there to visit his former throne. And he's stopped by a child. And we see that this child is wearing the uniform of the young communists, whatever they were called. I mean, this is not even a teenager. This is an actual child. For some reason, he's guarding the throne at the Forbidden City. I don't know if it's supposed to make sense. It's just what the movie wants to show. He's a child around the same age Puyi was when he was the emperor of China. Okay, so now this child is he's the new generation. He's working for the new emperor, and he's guarding the throne at the Forbidden City. And he sees Puyi try to walk to the throne, and he says, "Stop, you can't go there." So he's telling him, he sees just an ordinary old man, and he says, "You can't go to the throne." And it's next, Puyi kind of ignores him. It's just a child, and he tells him he has something that he wants he wants to show him. And this gets the child's interest. He beckons him to go to the throne, and we see Puyi finds a capsule with that's near the throne. The child is looking like, what is this old man doing? And Puyi opens up this capsule, and from it is the cricket that was once given to him as a child. So this is obviously like a magical scene, because I don't think, a cricket could live that long in a, like a capsule, like a jar. But this is something to think about. What does this scene mean? And well, and to continue it, Puyi tells him, I used to live here. I was the emperor of China. And this child doesn't know him from anything. To him, he thought it was just an ordinary man. And so what does this scene mean? It's like, this is, there's not really like a lot of these like magical type of scenes in the movie. Actually, I can't think of any others. Um, but I my take on it is that it's showing like the duality of Puyi's life as both an ordinary man and an emperor. And the cricket kind of represents that in a way, or it's like a metaphor for that, because Puyi, he is an ordinary man. He is a man just like everybody else, but at the same time, he holds he was a witness. He was one of the he was the emperor. He holds those secrets. He holds that knowledge. So he was all of these things. He would be the person who would know where the cricket is. But at the same time, he's also an ordinary man. He was somebody who made mistakes, who did terrible things, who aspired to something. He had successes, he had failures in many, many ways, and a lot of failures, actually. He was important to people. There were times where he was not important. He was just a prisoner. But to this child who doesn't know any better, he's just an ordinary man. And really, I guess if you could take anything away from the movie, it's that nobody is really a living God. And that you could say there will be people who will aspire to it. Like there was Puyi, and then there's Chairman Mao, and there will be somebody else in the future. And time will go on, and the person who was once the emperor will be a prisoner, and the person who was once the governor, he'll be humiliated with a dunce cap, and time will march on, and these things won't change. So that's my take on the final scene. As I said, I'd really like to hear all your interpretations on this. I'm sure maybe some of you think differently of it. There's so much in this movie. I'd like to go more into it in other podcasts. So thanks for listening. If you enjoy this channel, please subscribe, hit like. I'd like to make more content for people interested in things that I'm interested in. I have another podcast where I talk about Brooklyn, New York in the 2010s, what I saw there. It's there for you on YouTube. Thank you all for listening. Really appreciate it. Have a great night.